Welcome to the Bedtime Tales, where every night brings a story to dream by. I'm your host, and tonight, I'll be sharing the first part of the legend of King Arthur, a fantasy sleep story for adults. A timeless tale woven from mist and moonlight, courage and doubt, and the quiet power of belief in something greater than oneself. It begins, as all legends do, with a boy, a sword, and a fate written not in stone, but in shadow. In this story, you'll journey through forgotten glades and crumbling towers. You'll meet knights who've lost their way, queens who dream of peace, and a king learning what it means to carry both a crown and a conscience. And you'll witness the rise of something darker, not just in the land, but in the hearts of those sworn to protect it. This story is long, too long for one night alone. So we'll explore it in peaceful chapters, part by part, each one a gentle step deeper into Camelot's dream. So settle in, let the hush of evening surround you, rest your mind, slow your breath, and listen closely. Because here, on the Bedtime Tales, no story is ever truly lost.
The mist beyond Avalon. The winds whispered in a tongue older than stone. Long before the sun rose over Camelot, before the silver banners fluttered above its towers, before the name Arthur was etched into history, there was mist, endless, silent, breathing mist. It drifted over the lake like memory made visible, veiling the world in twilight softness. Time did not pass there. It flowed. At the edge of that silver lake, known only in hush to the druids as a Valak, a boy sat with his knees drawn to his chest and his gaze far beyond the shore. He was not yet a king. Not yet anything, really. Just a boy in a coarse cloak too big for him, living under the care of an old man with more secrets than teeth, in a forgotten part of Britain where the hills rolled like sleeping giants and the stars burned close and low. His name, though he didn't yet know its weight, was Arthur. He spent many evenings like this, perched on that mossy ledge near the shore, watching the lake as though it might one day speak back. And in a way, it did. Every now and then, the mist shifted, revealing shadowed outlines, trees that never grew, towers that weren't there before, lights that floated but left no ripple. Dreams, maybe. Or echoes. "Do you hear it too?" he whispered. From behind him, the old man stirred. He always arrived without sound. "Only when I forget the world long enough," said Merlin, his voice like a leaf sliding across stone. "The lake remembers those who listen." Arthur did not turn around. "Is it true? That Avalon lies beyond the mist?" Merlin's silence stretched. "Then, Avalon is not a place, boy. It is a veil. And like all veils, it is thin where dreams grow heavy." He sat beside the boy, setting down a satchel that clinked faintly, herbs and stones, charms for wind. Arthur glanced at it, then away. "You always say things like that." Merlin smiled faintly. "And still you ask." Arthur pulled his cloak tighter around him. The wind carried a strange scent tonight, like frost and firewood and something older. Something waking. "Will I ever see it?" he asked. "You already do," Merlin said, and then rose without another word. That was the way of the wizard, answers that were questions, questions that were lessons. Arthur never minded. The lake was company enough. And tonight, it shimmered like starlight in a bowl, and somewhere deep in its belly, something stirred. The next morning came like breath over coals. Mist clung low to the fields. Trees stood as still as grave markers. The village beyond the ridge lay hidden beneath a blanket of cloud. Arthur awoke in the stone hut with the sound of the bell chime, a dull, hollow sound. 3 chimes meant a rider. 1 meant a message. 2. He dressed quickly, his limbs still heavy with sleep. When he stepped outside, the chill bit into his skin. Merlin was already outside, standing at the edge of the stone path where a tall figure on horseback waited, cloaked in ash-grey wool. A woman. Her face was veiled, her hands gloved, but her voice, when it came, was clear and sharp as a drawn blade. "I come from Uther Pendragon," she said. Arthur blinked. He'd only heard that name in the background of firelight stories. A king without a crown. A warlord with a dragon's banner. His name felt too large for this small place. Merlin gave no sign of surprise. "He is dead." The woman nodded once. A fortnight passed. Poisoned. Silence fell like snowfall. She continued, "He left no heir, none the world knows." Arthur looked between them, the words heavy and unreal in the morning air. "Then Britain has no king," Merlin said softly. "Not yet," said the woman. And for the first time, she turned her veiled gaze to Arthur. Later that day, Merlin led Arthur deep into the forest of Broceliande. Not by path or trail, but through unmarked glades where the light fell wrong and the trees leaned as though listening. "You were not born for a quiet life," the wizard said as they walked. "I never wanted a loud one," Arthur murmured. "But you have it," said Merlin. "And the world has need of it." They stopped at a clearing where a single stone stood, a monolith with words carved in a script Arthur didn't know. But the blade he recognized. It was buried halfway into the stone, clean as a thought, silent as truth. The hilt was plain, but etched with a silver serpent spiraling into the grip. It did not glow. It did not hum. But it felt awake. Arthur stepped forward. "No," said Merlin. "Not yet." He reached into his robes and withdrew a pouch of chalk and bone, scattering the powder in a ring around the stone. "This is not a test of strength," he said. "It is a recognition." "Of what?" "Of the wound in the world," Merlin said, his eyes deep as night. "And who has the will to bind it?" Arthur stood there, uncertain. The sword shimmered in the breeze. "Can I ask something?" "You always can." "Will I be a good king?" Merlin paused, then said softly, "You will be one the world remembers." That night, the dreams came. Not the soft kind that drift through the curtain of sleep, but ones that landed like arrows in the mind. He saw fires and fields of battle. He saw stone walls crumbling. He saw a round table shining with the light of 100 torches. He saw knights rise and fall, and a great beast writhing in shadow. And always, in the center of it all, a sword blazing with light, but not fire. Memory. When he awoke, his hand was already outstretched toward the lake. The mist had retreated slightly. And far across the water, just for a moment, he thought he saw her. A woman in white, standing on the surface as though it was solid glass. Her hair was raven dark, her face half covered by a silver veil, and in her hands she held not a sword, but a crown of woven branches and starlight. Then she was gone. And Arthur knew something had begun. The sword and the circle. The sun did not rise the next morning. It arrived as a pale warmth through clouded sky, a dull sheen that turned the dewdrop silver and the forest shadows soft. Birds did not sing. Even the breeze held its breath. Arthur and Merlin stood before the stone again. This time, Merlin said nothing. The ring of dust he had drawn the day before had vanished. The earth inside it was damp, almost glowing, as if something beneath had pulsed gently through the night. And there, unchanged, was the sword, its hilt wrapped in dark leather, its pommel plain, as if it had not waited for centuries. Arthur stared at it, not with awe, but with the quiet, alert caution of a dreamer testing the line between sleep and waking. "Do I just take it?" he asked. Merlin didn't answer. Arthur stepped forward. Each pace echoed through his limbs like thunder. not because he feared the sword, but because he feared what it would mean once held. He reached for the hilt. It was warm. Not hot like a weapon forged in fire, but warm like sunlight in winter or skin against skin, familiar, steady, alive. It thrummed beneath his palm like something remembering its name. He pulled. It did not resist. It came free like it had always belonged in his hand. As the steel cleared the stone, a low wind rippled through the trees. The mist that had hung about the glade lifted in a single breath, and in its place, silence fell, rich, total, endless. Arthur stood, the blade bare in his hand. No angels sang. No lightning split the sky. But in the hush that followed, he heard it, a single whisper, ancient and distant, curling through the air. He has returned. They traveled east toward the rising light. The woman in ash gray, the one who had brought news of Uther's death, rode ahead. She had removed her veil but spoke little. Her name was Nimue, and her eyes held no fear, only memory. "Others will come," she said once, when they made camp beneath the boughs of a hollowed oak. "Knights?" Arthur asked. "Not yet," she replied. "Doubt. Envy. Those who wear crowns in smaller halls. They will come first." Arthur looked down at the sword lying beside him. "Then I'll fight." "No," Merlin said, not unkindly. "You'll listen. And you'll wait. Power that moves too soon burns the hands that wield it." Arthur said nothing, but he tightened his cloak around him. The blade still felt heavy in his mind. That night, the dreams returned. This time, they brought names. He stood in a hall of stone and fire. 12 men and women sat around a perfect circle of oak. No head, no throne, only equals. He saw faces, one with hair of bronze and eyes like stormlight, another cloaked in green and shadow, speaking softly, one laughing, bold as a lion. Then he saw her. Guinevere. She was not yet queen. She wore no jewels. But her gaze was clear as dawn over water, and when she looked at him, the dream trembled. He reached out and woke. A week passed in slow procession through mist and moor. Villages whispered as they passed. Some offered bread, some bowed, some ran. They had heard of the boy who drew the sword from stone. Some called him a thief, others a ghost. A few called him king. Arthur said nothing. When they reached the high cliffs of Camelot, the clouds broke for the first time. Sea winds curled up from the deep, and there, on a plateau of green stone, stood a castle with no banners, no guard, and no gate. "The last crown waits here," Nimue said. They entered. Within, a single man stood before a black altar, hands clasped behind his back. His armor was old but polished, marked with sigils Arthur did not recognize. His beard was gray, but his eyes burned. "Another boy with a sword," the man said, without turning. "Britain breeds them like sheep these days." Arthur stepped forward. "I am Arthur," he said. "I know what you are," the man replied. He turned. "What I don't know is why the sword came to you and not to me." His name was Lot, a warlord of the north. One of Uther's bitterest rivals. Arthur did not raise his blade. Instead, he said simply, "I didn't take it. It came." Lot laughed. "Magic speaks in riddles and crowns fools. Do you know how many good men died to keep this island from drowning?" "Enough," Merlin said coldly. "Let it drown in peace, then." Lot's eyes narrowed. "You'll need more than a wizard's tongue to hold Camelot." "I know," Arthur said. And in that moment, his voice held something new, not defiance, but stillness. Like the lake. Lot studied him. Then he nodded. Then kneel. Not to me. To the land. Arthur dropped to one knee. The sea wind howled. Lot stepped forward and drew a short dagger from his belt. He pressed its tip to Arthur's shoulder, not in threat, but in ritual. A cut. A drop of blood. Then he pressed his hand to the earth. Then rise, Arthur Pendragon, he said, and know that the land remembers. Later that night, Arthur stood alone at the castle wall, looking east. Nimue joined him, silent. He asked her, "What is Camelot?" She did not answer at first. Then, a name. A place. A promise. Of what? Of what the world could be if the strong chose justice over power. He looked down at Excalibur. "I don't feel like a king." "No king ever does," she said. "The sword is not proof. What you do with it is." And somewhere, far beyond the sea, a horn blew. A war was waking. And the dream had only just begun. The table without a head. The sun was still low when Arthur and Merlin rode from Camelot. The castle behind them disappeared into the sea mist like a dream fading at dawn, and before them the hills stretched wide and golden, untouched by banners, quiet as breath. Nimue did not ride with them. She had vanished before the morning, no footsteps in the grass, no impression in the dew. Only a single black feather left on the saddle horn. Merlin said nothing of it. Arthur did not ask. They followed a winding trail through the valley of the Wye, the river tracing the land like silver thread. Somewhere in the hills ahead, Merlin said, there was a place where kings once held court, before there were thrones, before even Rome had sunk her roots into the island. A place older than names, he called it. Where truths are still born. Arthur asked, "Is that where the table is?" Merlin smiled faintly. "The table is not there. But what it will become begins there." And then, a voice. Not his. Not Merlin's. A woman's, clear and soft. "The land has chosen. Now the land must gather." Arthur pulled back, breath shallow. "Did you hear that?" "I did," Merlin said. "And so will others." They came in ones and twos. By the seventh night, the glade was full of firelight and low conversation. Riders from the east, cloaked in mud and wind. A pair of warriors from the northern shores, quiet and hard-eyed. Even a wandering priest, who said he had dreamt of the circle for 3 nights straight and had followed the sunrise until it brought him here. But the one Arthur noticed most arrived in the dark. He came alone, on a horse blacker than nightfall. His armor was worn but clean. His hair was unbound, falling in copper waves to his shoulders, and his voice, when he spoke, was calm and deep, like an old river. "My name is Gawain," he said. "I heard the land calling." Arthur looked at Merlin, who nodded. "Then sit with us," Arthur said, gesturing to the ring of stones. Gawain walked into the circle, knelt, and placed his palm on the wood. His eyes fluttered closed. When he opened them again, he looked straight at Arthur. "You carry Excalibur." Arthur nodded. "You are not what I expected." Arthur frowned. "What did you expect?" Gawain stood. A man trying to be king. Not a boy who already is. Arthur flushed. But Gawain smiled, and the weight of his words landed gently instead of sharp. That night, Arthur sat beside the small fire while the others spoke, of border disputes, of raiders from the Western Isles, of a shadow rising in the forests near Camelot. It was then that Gawain approached him again. "There's talk," he said, sitting on a fallen log. "Of something old stirring in the marshlands." "Wolves?" Arthur asked. "Worse. Not beasts. Whispers. People going mad." speaking in tongues, seeing things that aren't there. Arthur looked into the fire. What do you think it is? Gawain took a long breath. Some say it's Mordred. The name felt like a chill beneath the skin. I thought he was just a tale. So did I, Gawain said. But tales come from somewhere. The next morning, Merlin led Arthur alone into the woods. They walked for an hour before stopping at a shallow pool, fed by a thin stream. The water was clear, still, cold. Merlin handed Arthur a stone cup. Drink. Arthur hesitated. Why? To remember what you do not yet know. He drank. The world stilled. He fell, not with fear, but with a feeling like sleep rushing in. When his eyes opened again, the woods were gone. He stood on a battlefield. Flames curled around broken towers. Knights lay in heaps. A circle of ash marked where the table once stood. And at the center of it all, two figures. Arthur. And another. A boy with Arthur's face, but colder. Darker. Crownless, yet surrounded by a crown of fire. Their swords clashed. Their names rang in the sky. Mordred. Arthur. Father and son. Opposites and mirror. The vision shattered. Arthur gasped, dropping to his knees at the pool's edge. Water spilled from the cup. Merlin stood above him, solemn. Is that the future? Arthur whispered. Merlin crouched beside him. It is one. Arthur's hands trembled. Can I stop it? Merlin looked at him for a long time. Yes, he said, but not alone. That evening, as the campfires burned low and the circle filled with voices, Arthur stood. I do not know all your names, he said, and I cannot promise peace. But I can promise that I will not be king above you, I will be king among you. He gestured to the wooden disc. This circle has no throne, no edge, only unity. Let us build it together. They rose, one by one. And though no crown rested on his brow, that night they called him king. And the land listened. The marshlight whisper. The days that followed the founding of the circle passed quietly, but not peacefully. Word of Arthur's rising spread far and fast. Travelers came with offerings of fealty and caution alike. Some brought food, others brought questions. Most brought rumors. At night, the glade filled with low voices speaking of strange occurrences, livestock wandering from fields and never returning, children waking from shared dreams of shadowy figures, and villagers glimpsing twisted reflections in still water. The name that followed these tales, whispered like a curse, was Mordred. Arthur listened. He did not yet speak of what he'd seen in the pool. But the vision haunted him, pressing against his thoughts like a weight he could not lift. Merlin took him aside one evening, walking slowly through the outer trees. The marshlands of Dunwil stir, he said. Something dark has rooted there. If left alone, it will spread. Arthur nodded. We go at first light. I thought you might say that, Merlin replied, his eyes unreadable. The road to Dunwil was unlike any Arthur had known. It wound through thickets and fens where trees leaned inward as though confiding secrets. The light was strange here, muted, even at midday. The land felt old, and not kindly so. He traveled with Gawain and two others, Bedivere, strong and steady, and Elaine, whose voice was soft but whose arrows struck true. They moved in silence for most of the journey. The weight of what they might find pressed in from all sides. As they neared the edge of the marsh, a scent filled the air, wet soil, sweet rot, and something metallic beneath. Mist clung to the ground in swirling tendrils, shifting with the wind like breath. Something's wrong here, Elaine murmured, stringing her bow. "It's too quiet." They dismounted, leading their horses through the thick reeds. Every step sank slightly, the ground trembling as if beneath a shallow skin of water. Strange shapes appeared in the mist, half-fallen trees, twisted stone, once a flicker of something that vanished the moment Arthur turned his head. Then they heard it, a voice, distant and low. "Return." They stopped. "Did you?" Bedivere began. "Quiet," Gawain said, drawing his blade. The voice came again. "Closer now. You left me." Arthur stepped forward, heart pounding, and the mist parted just enough to reveal a figure kneeling at the water's edge. It was a boy. Young, pale, drenched to the bone. His hair clung to his face, and his hands trembled as he reached toward the water. Arthur approached slowly. "Are you hurt?" The boy looked up. His eyes were completely white. "Too late," he whispered. "He's already awake." Then the ground beneath him gave way, and he sank without a splash. Just silence. Elaine gasped. Bedivere surged forward but found only reeds. "He wasn't real," Gawain said. "A shadow. A memory." Arthur's hand tightened around his sword. "Or a warning." They made camp on a patch of high ground beneath a crooked willow. The fire struggled to hold against the damp air. Around them, the marsh hummed with distant croaks and rustlings that never resolved into form. Arthur sat apart, eyes fixed on the water beyond. He thought of the boy's voice. The way it seemed to echo in his mind long after he vanished. He felt Merlin approach before he heard him. "You felt it too," Arthur said. "Yes." The wizard crouched beside the fire. "The veil is thin here. Something stirs beneath it." "Is it Mordred?" Merlin hesitated. "Not yet. But his shadow moves. And it is learning to shape the world." Arthur frowned. "What does it want?" "To be known," Merlin said. "To be seen. That's how such things grow." They sat in silence for a while. The mist shifted. A single lantern bug drifted near, its green glow hovering like a ghost. "Do you think I'll be ready?" Arthur asked quietly. Merlin looked at him. "No." Arthur blinked. "But that doesn't matter," Merlin said. "The land doesn't wait for readiness. It calls, and you answer." Arthur nodded slowly. "Then, softly, then we ride at first light." Merlin smiled faintly. "Of course we do." The next morning, the mist parted with the sun's rising, and in its place they found the path forward, a causeway of ancient stone, half-sunken and slick with moss. It led through the center of the marsh like a spine. At the end of it stood a tower. It rose from the water like a broken tooth, crooked and covered in vines. No banners flew from its peak, no signs of life. But as they neared, they saw the door, open just enough to beckon. They dismounted in silence. Arthur went first. The interior was dark and wet, the air thick with decay. Water dripped from the ceiling. Mold crept up the walls. They climbed a spiral stair slick with lichen, swords drawn. At the top, they found a chamber lit only by the soft blue glow of lichen along the walls. And in the center, atop a stone pedestal, sat a crown. It was simple. Bronze. Unadorned. And yet, as Arthur approached, it pulsed faintly, as if aware. "What is it?" Bedivere asked. Arthur reached out, but did not touch. Then he heard it again. "Son." He spun. No one there. "Arthur?" Gawain asked. He turned back to the crown. The glow faded. He stepped back. "We leave it," he said. "It's not for us." And for a moment, He thought he saw a shadow in the corner, a boy with his face, watching. Then it vanished. And outside, the mist thickened once more. They left the tower before midday, though time in the marsh seemed to bend and wander. Clouds passed across the sun without shadows. The air remained still, too still, as if even the wind dared not disturb what slept there. No one spoke much as they rode. Arthur carried the silence with him like a second cloak. Not because of fear, but because of what he hadn't felt. The crown in that tower had pulsed with presence, but not warmth. It had felt hollow, like a crown that ruled shadows, not men. As they crossed the final stretch of the fen, the fog finally thinned and green hills began to return. Arthur turned once more to look behind. The tower was gone. Only reeds and water remained. They returned to the glade on the 7th day. The circle was larger now. New tents ringed the clearing. Horses grazed along the ridge. Children ran laughing through the oaks, some who had come with merchants, others with nobles seeking favor. The round table had changed, too. Still plain in its build, but now lined with newly carved sigils, each etched by one of the sworn knights. Not coats of arms, not yet, but symbols of vow and presence. Gawain's showed a rising sun. Elaine's, a feather over water. Bedivere was a mountain, steady and still. Arthur had no mark yet. He sat at the edge of the circle that night, staring at the unmarked wood before him. Guinevere arrived without sound. She was not cloaked like the last time he'd dreamt her. Her hair was braided now, her boots worn with travel. She did not sit immediately, only stood with her arms crossed, eyes scanning the camp. "It's grown," she said. Arthur looked up. "Yes. Too quickly, maybe." He half smiled. "The world doesn't ask if you're ready." She tilted her head. "Are you?" He looked down again. "No." That answer surprised her less than it should have. She sat beside him, close enough for their arms to touch. "You sent no message." "I didn't know if I should." Guinevere glanced at him. "And now?" Arthur's gaze drifted to the table again. "There's a shadow coming," he said. "I saw it in the marsh. It's not a man. Not yet. But it's learning. And it knows me." Her expression changed, not with fear, but with recognition. "I've dreamt of it too," she said softly. "A boy. With your face, but colder." Arthur turned. "You saw him?" Guinevere nodded. "He stood behind a door. I couldn't see where it led. But he was waiting." Arthur swallowed. "Do you think mine?" Guinevere said nothing for a long time. Then, quietly, "I think everyone's. He is what we cast away. The cost we don't count." Arthur leaned forward, elbows on knees, fingers laced. "Then what do we do?" She touched the table. "We build something worth the cost." Later, Merlin approached. "You saw him again," he said. Arthur nodded. "He's closer." "Yes. And more defined." "Can we stop him?" "Not by denying him," Merlin said. "Only by meeting him. And making the meeting mean something." Arthur stood and walked slowly to the unmarked seat. He reached into his tunic and withdrew a coin, one Merlin had given him long ago. On one side, a tree. On the other, a sword. He pressed it to the table. It left a faint impression, both symbols shining together. Merlin smiled. "Balance. Root and blade." Arthur looked up. "Is that what I am?" "No," Merlin said. "It's what you're becoming." The next morning brought riders. 3 of them. Cloaked in red and silver, their horses lean from long roads. They bore the seal of Caer Grelin, a border stronghold. The lead rider, a woman named Isolde, dismounted and bowed low. "My lord," she said, "something approaches from the east. Smoke without fire. Voices in the fog. We've held the watch for a week, but it grows louder." Arthur turned to Merlin. "The crown waits no longer," the wizard said. Arthur looked out over the growing camp. His knights were still few. Their walls were made of tents and hope. But he nodded. "Then we ride." He turned to Guinevere. "Will you stay?" She gave a half-smile. "No. I'll ride at your left." And that night, as the fires died and the stars turned slow above the trees, Arthur stood once more beside the round table. His hand rested on the mark he had made. And across the table, in a corner no one else seemed to look at, the shadow of a boy stood waiting, quiet, still, smiling. Not yet real. But soon. They left before the sun rose. No horn blew. No banners flew. Just the quiet shuffle of horses' hooves on dew-wet grass and the whisper of steel against leather. Arthur rode at the front, his cloak trailing over the back of his saddle, Excalibur sheathed but near. Behind him, Gawain, Elaine, Bedivere, Guinevere, and a dozen others rode in silence, following the old Roman road eastward. The land changed quickly. Rolling hills gave way to flatter plains, and mist clung low, seeping into the folds of every voice. Trees grew taller here, but thinner, like they had stretched upward trying to escape something below. The farther they went, the less they heard, no birdsong, no rustle of deer or hare. Only wind. And once, a deep, echoing sound like the groan of something very old beneath the soil. By the third day, the road vanished entirely, swallowed by moss and time. The party moved single file through a corridor of leaning stones and grass-choked ruins. Guinevere pulled her horse alongside Arthur. "Have you noticed?" she said, her voice low. He looked to her. "The air. It's like walking through someone else's memory." He nodded. "It doesn't feel like Britain anymore." "No," she agreed. "It feels like something watching Britain. From beneath." That night, they made camp on a rise of dry ground, ringed with bramble and old cairns. As the others slept, Arthur walked the perimeter. He passed Bedivere, who sat sharpening his blade without speaking, and Elaine, who cleaned her bowstring with practiced calm. Gawain sat alone, staring into the fire, his brow furrowed not in fear but in thought. Arthur joined him. "What troubles you?" Gawain didn't look away from the flames. "The silence." Arthur waited. In battle, silence usually means either the enemy is retreating or waiting to strike. But this feels different. Like the land itself is holding its breath. Arthur said, "Do you think it's a trap?" Gawain shook his head. "Worse. I think it's a test." They fell quiet again. And then, from beyond the camp's edge, a cry rang out. Not human. Not animal. Something in between. Arthur was on his feet instantly. The knights rose, weapons drawn. The horses stirred but did not bolt, unnerved, but not panicked. Then, just as suddenly, the cry stopped. Only stillness. Merlin emerged from the shadows, his face unreadable. "It's begun," he said. "His knee." By dawn, the path had become a trail of ash. They followed it. The air grew warmer. Trees leaned away from them, their leaves curled at the edges. The stones beneath their feet were cracked, and here and there, strange marks appeared, spirals etched into the rock, some large enough to stand inside, others so faint they vanished when touched. Then they came upon the village. Or what was left of it. charred timbers, blackened stone. A single well, still steaming slightly, though the fire had long since passed. No bodies, but not from fleeing. Arthur dismounted. He walked slowly through the ruins, touching walls as if they might speak. Then he saw it, on the far edge of the village, a child's doll, half buried in ash. Its painted eyes were wide, the fabric singed. Guinevere came to stand beside him. "They didn't run," she said. "No, they vanished." He turned the doll over. Beneath it, a symbol had been drawn into the earth. A circle, split by a jagged line. Arthur's heart thudded. He'd seen it before. In his dreams. On a door. The one the boy stood behind. Gawain crouched beside him. "His leaving signs now." "No," Arthur said. "His leaving invitations." That night, around the fire, Arthur spoke to them all. "Something is coming," he said. "We've all felt it. Seen it." No one disagreed. "I don't have answers. Not yet. But I know this, we're not facing a man. Not only a man. What we face is the echo of our failings. The part of the world we turn from. If we meet it with swords alone, we'll lose." Guinevere's voice carried. "Then what do we meet it with?" Arthur looked around the fire. "With truth." He reached into his satchel and withdrew the map they had followed, a crude thing, marked with guesses and half-remembered paths. He set it in the flames. The parchment curled, then blackened. Gasps sounded, but Arthur raised a hand. "We won't find him by following old roads," he said. "Only by walking into the unknown." The next day, the path did not lead them, it responded to them. Trees opened in places they hadn't before. Stones shifted. A stream they crossed in the morning was gone by noon. The world itself seemed uncertain, as if they were slipping through the seams of something unfinished. And then, just before twilight, they saw him. On a hill of black grass stood a figure. Small. Cloaked. Unmoving. Arthur rode ahead, leaving the others behind. When he reached the hilltop, the figure turned. A boy. No older than 12. Hair like his. Eyes darker. Hollow, yet aware. Arthur dismounted slowly. "You're him," he said. The boy did not speak. "You've been calling me." Still no answer. Arthur stepped closer. "What do you want?" The boy raised one hand and pointed. Behind him, on the far horizon, smoke rose from another village. Then he spoke. His voice was soft. "Familiar. I want to be real." Then he vanished. And far in the distance, thunder rolled, without rain. Tonight, the land was watching. And somewhere, deep in the folds of twilight, Mordred waited.
And so the first part of our tale fades like mist into moonlight. May your own dreams carry you gently beyond the veil. Until next time, sleep well.